Hi, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be redesigning Cleo de Nile. So usually for these redesigns, I try to approach it as if I've not been exposed to monster high designs before and just do my own take on it. So I often go back to the source material of the monster. However, the mummy as a monster comes from a very different origin than a lot of other monsters in this series, where the fear that the mummy represents is a fairly modern one that also has some heavy implications. The history of the mummy as a monster comes from around Victorian era Europeans being first influenced by the mummy craze that was overtaking Europe during the Victorian period through about the 1920s, and it represented the European fear of brown bodies essentially. It was very deeply rooted in Orientalism and the fear of a foreign other that is able to attack from even beyond the grave. So there were points in this where I debated changing the base monster of Cleo entirely because it is such a heavy monster that it is based on. And most monsters really, are based on cultural fears, and a lot of those fears often tie back to the fear of the other. But given that the mummy is a lot more modern in its racism, it really feels to me that there's just not a good way to do a mummy adaptation in the modern day when it is based so heavily in just Orientalist fears. But I also ultimately felt that if I changed the monster type entirely, it would not be really a redesign and more just creating something entirely different. So I felt the best way to go about this video in particular, while maintaining the original premise, but treating it a lot more respectfully and reckoning with the origin of the mummy, would be to instead treat it as any other undead, or go back to the root of the culture that it is based on, instead of basing it on the way that it has been portrayed in Western media throughout the past century or so. So in order to do my research, I took a trip out to the Denver Museum of Natural Science and visited their Egyptian mummies exhibit, where I was able to see in-person mummies and artifacts and grave goods, and I took pictures of all the placards and all the stuff that was in the exhibit so I could add them to my mood board here and study them more when I got home. And there's also more notes and such that I took that aren't in this little mood board here. But I wanted to treat it respectfully and treat it as an undead and look at it more through the lens of historical fashion than historical racism. So I didn't want to reference a lot of the modern mummy mythology of like having powers over plagues and being like these supernatural monsters that are often seen as sexual competitors for white women. And I really wanted to focus more on the aspects of Egyptian culture and again historical fashion, because that is something I really like. And again, have her design reference grave goods in the same way that I did with Julia, where I have references to the things that are associated with Western grave goods like coffins and tombstones. I wanted to reference with her things like ushabtis and scarabs. So getting to the contents of the mood board itself, I have many pictures from the exhibits, as well as some pictures from online of historical garments and historical art, and a few pictures of modern fashion as well, because I wanted her aesthetic to be very luxurious and expensive and posh really, since I felt that fit her character. So starting off with her body type, I wanted it to be very skinny and bony and reflect the looks of actual mummies, and I based her face off the facial reconstruction of the mummy from the Denver Museum as well. I didn't include any pictures of actual mummies in this video, but I did look at them and take inspiration for how I wanted her body type to be. So for the first look, I went with a braided bob hairstyle that is a wig, since that was very common in ancient Egyptian hairstyling. I gave her some shades to reflect the more modern sort of posh look, and I wanted to incorporate Egyptian jewelry and mummy wraps into her look, and transform the plain linen dresses that were common in ancient Egypt into a pair of flared linen pants with patterns up the side that mimic the intricate patterns that were found on the sarcophagi, and I wanted to include a sash as a belt. For the second look, I went a bit more loose and flowing to sort of have the dress be a more modern take on the long skirted dresses of ancient Egypt, and to also visually reference the look of flowing mummy wraps. I also gave her a sheer shawl in reference to the Kala series, which were sheer linen tunics that were worn draped across the body. Again, I gave her a bob, but this time with blunt bangs, and to incorporate the idea of a headdress into her look, I instead gave her a head wrap to keep it modern and fashionable up top, and I incorporated that sash again, having it hang askew from her, and I gave her shoes with a little pyramid heel. For the third look, I was inspired by the beaded net dresses, which are made from individual beads and shells that were woven into geometric patterns and worn over plain garments, and I wanted to shorten it to modernize it and give her a couple of mismatched mummy wrap sleeves and gladiator sandals that mimic the look of wrappings, and also called to mind the area of ancient Egypt and ancient Greece with some pyramid heels and a sort of diamond-shaped toe box. I wanted her hair to be cut cropped short, as it would have been underneath the wigs that were often worn. For the fourth look, I decided to go a bit longer on her hair and more dramatic with the headdress, so she has a big bird headdress and a long flowing sheer calaseries over a tight black leather dress underneath, with some mummy wrap leggings and some tall boots with an object heel of a slab with hieroglyphics on it, and some mummy wraps that tie onto both of her wrists and create this sort of embedded shawl in her silhouette. For her purse, I had the idea of a pretty basic pyramid-shaped bag, but with the idea of ushabti labubus. Ushabtis were grave goods that were included with mummies, originally to stand in for the body of the mummy in case the mummy itself was destroyed, and later on they came to represent servants that the mummy could call upon to do labor for them in the afterlife. And later on in ancient Egypt, they became mass-produced and very common to be found in burials, so I saw a similarity there to the labubu trend, which I know is like fading out right now, but I thought it'd be a fun little reference to give her some keychains on her bag. Then for the final look, I decided to go with her hair pulled up into a bun with a scarab-shaped claw clip and some dramatic bangs with some small angular sunglasses to get that popular prep girl look across. I also wanted to give her a long scarf of mummy wrap and incorporate the patterns found on sarcophagi into her top. That has this dramatic neckline that is also part of the sleeves, that has a tight dress underneath and a sheer caliceres over it wrapped with a sash that has a gold belt piece with a bunch of gem patterns on it. And then one legging of mummy wraps and some wrap style shoe sandals that are flat and specifically have a long curved toe as ancient Egyptian fashion that was a signifier of royalty. I also wanted to give her a bunch of little rings and bracelets inspired by pieces that were found to have been produced in ancient Egypt or inspired by symbols that were common back then. So as per usual, I then made a list of what I liked of each of the thumbnail designs in order to combine them all into one coherent design. If this is your first time watching one of these videos, I like to make 5 little thumbnails just like the one you just saw me make, and then combine all my different ideas that I had from this exploratory phase to come up with something better than I could have if I just gave it my first go at redesigning something. So I really like the idea of the braided bob, and I decided to add some gold and blue streaks into it and have her bangs be pulled up in the back with a scarab claw clip. I also wanted to give her a really dramatic statement necklace based on historical collars, and these are a shielded sort of gold bejeweled wrap around her neck. I really liked that beaded net dress, and I decided to incorporate it by giving her a plain linen top that has the net of beads and shells over top it, and a cropped sweetheart neckline. I gave her 2 differently sized sleeves of mummy wraps on each of her arms and gave her a caliceres to hold as a wrap around her arms to give her an almost wing-like silhouette, since birds are very common and very important ancient Egyptian symbols. I really liked the flared pants from my first thumbnail sketch, probably biased because Skull Shores is one of my favorite Cleo dolls I ever made. So I wanted to incorporate that and keep it a nice white linen to make reference to the original dresses of ancient Egypt, but also add the little patterns from sarcophagi and tombs up the sides of the legs to make it more interesting. I then decided to give her a sash as a belt. For her shoes, I went with a pyramid heel in a malachite green with a gladiator style wrap on solid gold shoe base with the dramatic curved pointed toes to signify her royalty. I also wanted to incorporate her purse, but I did end up changing the design from my original later on. Usually I do a small thumbnail sketch of the face, but back in March of last year, I actually made a overly detailed Cleo de Nile doodle that was sort of exploratory for a lot of the bases of her makeup and hair and body. So let's get into those details as I start adding the color flats for the final line work. Starting off, I gave her a desaturated, almost ashy brown skin tone that you find in mummies, and oftentimes black hair will take on a rich red undertone when preserved, so I decided to make her hair more of an auburn sort of color. Elite women would sometimes keep their hair cropped, more easily wear wigs on top of it, so I'm imagining the braids here would be a wig that you put on top of the doll that has like a flocked buzz / pixie cut underneath. For her eyes, blue-gray eyes are rare but not impossible in ancient Egyptian populations, but cool eye tones had divine associations and were commonly portrayed on statues, so I decided to go with the pale bluish-gray eye to give her that ethereal, ghostly look culturally speaking. Aquiline noses were common in all demographics present in ancient Egypt, and her facial structure overall is again pretty strongly based on the facial reconstruction from the Denver Museum of Natural History. Makeup consisted of black liner, malachite eye color, and red paste for lipstick and blush, and I also wanted to give her makeup that incorporated the Wadjet eye, or Eye of Horus, into her design, which symbolizes the power of healing, which I felt was really appropriate as she has a character arc of going from a bully and antagonist to one of the main ghouls and learning empathy and kindness and stepping away from the abuse of her family. Near whole body tattoos are found on some female mummies, typically of religious symbols, as well as some geometric curves throughout. So some of the symbols I decided to incorporate here were the Ujat, Nefer, Shea, Ankh, lotus blossoms, cobras, and scarabs, and several tattoos on her are taken directly from remains that were found. Tattoos were done with either charcoal, soot, or indigo powder, so they would have had a black or dark blue hue about them, and clothing was primarily white linen, but some periods saw usage of jewel-toned dyes, which ties in perfectly to talking about her color palette, which I wanted to keep mostly warm off-whites with cool light aquas to add contrast to the warmer whites, and incorporate jewel tones and gold throughout her design. And specifically on the largest section of her patterns pattern, I wanted to incorporate gold stars on a blue background, which comes from the painted stars that are found on tomb walls and ceilings to represent the night sky, the forever beyond, and let mummies view the night sky forever. And it is actually thought to be the first representation of a 5-pointed star in human culture. Going into some more little details throughout her design, I decided to make her glasses have a wing-like shape to them on the outer frame, but have the inner frame of translucent blue have the outline of a sarcophagus. And I wanted to include lots of jewelry throughout her design, again to show her status. So starting off with the rings on her right hand, I wanted to give her a gold ring that has a cat carved into red gemstone, and a shield-like ring on her middle finger, with a symbol of a falcon on it representing Horus. On her ring finger, she has 2 gold bands, and then on her pinky finger, she has a malachite ring in the shape of a scarab, as scarab molds were commonly found in grave goods, and inscriptions on the bottom offered prayers for the deceased. Beneath, she has some simple bracelets that are based on real bracelets that you can find at the Denver Museum, which are made from bronze, or alternatively turtle shell or glazed ceramic, but I went with a goldish bronze for Cleo to deepen her color palette. I also gave her a snake-like armband on her left arm at the top that I imagine is a gift from Deuce, and a gold bracelet with these big green gem panels. And then on her pointer finger, I gave her a gold snake-like ring, as the legend of Cleopatra is associated with snakes. On the middle finger, I gave her a blue azurite ring. On her ring finger she has a ring in bronze and another scarab ring but in a light blue color, and on her pinky she has this shield-like ring in silver. I ended up changing the base design of her handbag and basing the bag on a more traditional Egyptian handbag, combining with some longer tassels that I feel like are more modern, but still keeping the Ushapti loop boo boo idea. I also of course gave her her classic gold eye coffin and some little wing-like aqua earrings. I also wanted to incorporate into this design overall the sort of approach to Egyptian art where everything is drawn at a flat angle that is most recognizable, so instead of the glasses being in perspective or a side view, or the scarab clip being more of a side view than front on, they're drawn at sort of a straight on angle, and similarly the hands are posed a bit like awkwardly, you could say, in proportion. But in doing this I learned a lot about the sort of stylistics of ancient Egyptian art, and I really like the overall look of this piece. I think it's honestly a great art style for fashion designs in particular like this, because since you're drawing everything at a flat angle where everything's spread out nicely, you can like see everything and it makes the design super readable. For her hair, I originally just drew it as sort of loose wavy shapes, but I then went in digitally and added the line work for each of the individual braids so I could incorporate the different colors into individual strands. Since the wigs were made of mostly fairly thick braids, but at the front of the hairline there were thinner braids to mask the wearer's hairline, sort of the same as a modern lace front wig would do, so I decided to have the hairline framing pieces be pure gold with a little green bead at the bottom. I also imagined the callus series being pleated, and I tried to show that by having there be some light aqua lines throughout it, and I really like the effect that it has. Her total redesign time, not including sketching and line work of the final piece, since I do that traditionally, was 4 hours, 26 minutes, and 31 seconds, which is the 4th longest time that I've spent on one of these redesigns. Which makes sense as there were a lot of little details, and because there are so many patterns and everything going on, I felt I had a little bit of trouble keeping the palette sort of balanced and looking well, and the photo editing that I do after finishing a piece definitely helped a lot with pulling everything together. For the background, I used 2 pictures that I took at the Denver Museum again, with the main part of the background being their recreation of a coffin. It was created in 1994 by the museum's Egyptian Studies Society, where a group of volunteers spent 2 years studying ancient Egyptian art and materials and techniques, and then built and painted this coffin to demonstrate their work. And I found this to be one of the most useful pieces in the collection in terms of design because it has so many intricate little details and colors and repeating patterns and art on it, and that was really helpful to have all these different sort of techniques and styles and designs put together in one place so I could sort of look at everything and take what I saw here, combine it with what I saw in other actual historical art pieces, and see what was common, what would be representative to include in her design as part of the patterns throughout, and so I definitely wanted to include it in the background itself, and it just so happened that it lined up really perfectly with her silhouette of her body itself to make it look like she has these big falcon wings, so I thought that was a really cool effect. And then I just filled in the background with the ceiling stars, because it fit the palette and I just like that little bit of history, I think it's sweet. And now it's time for the reveal. And here's my final redesign of Cleo de Nile. I'm really happy with how she looks. I love all the little details, and I really love whenever I get to learn about historical fashion and historical cultures and really dive into exploring ancient techniques and incorporating them into a more modern silhouette and style of clothing. And I think she honestly turned out so good. The only thing I had second thoughts about here was making her hair more of a reddish brown instead of the classic black or dark blue that it is often, and I played around with making it that color, but truthfully I think the auburn really works for this particular palette that I have going on here, and I feel like whenever I make a big change to a character like this, I often find myself going back and trying to like double check if it was the right decision and if I should have deviated so much, but really I think it looks good, and I like that it's historical detailed, the preservation process and how bodies age throughout time. I really love her silhouette and color palette, and I also did something a little bit new here where I have her line art be a little bit transparent so it's not so harsh of a black, and I really think it helps with all the little details not be made so really like heavy by the line work, and it lets the colors of those fine little details prevail a little bit more. Moving on to our comparison between generations, I feel like throughout the series, since it's been going on for a couple years, my art style's really changed a lot from the original Monster High art style, and I definitely feel like you can see the threads between the different generations leading to mine, but I feel like my redesign is quite different from Cleo as she's been presented in the past, even though for me, I'm always happiest with my redesigns when I look at it and all I see is the character that I've always seen. Like, it's just a representation of how my brain has always interpreted the character, and it's always kind of jarring when I see my redesign of Cleo, which is how I always sort of imagined her, be so starkly different from the Cleo that is presented throughout previous generations, that is often based on more stereotypical interpretations of the mummy myth. But I'm really happy with how she turned out, and I love all the little tiny details on her, and I think this would be a really cool collector doll. And I also feel like this look could pretty easily be simplified into a regular, more affordable release, since a lot of the complexities are just patterns and things that would be molded on details like rings being part of her bony hands. And then here's my lineup of the main 7 of the cast that I've done so far. I feel like you can really tell that Cleo is the newest of these redesigns and that she has a slightly different line art style than usual going on, but I'm really happy with how she stands out, and every single one I've redesigned so far has incorporated green somewhere in the palette, so that like ties them all together, makes them pretty cohesive. I also feel like her palette is a lot less saturated from the others in the cast, which is purposeful, and I think it helps to set her apart and make her look more regal and refined than the rest of the cast, where I'm often going for more sort of campy, playful look, but with Cleo I wanted her to be quite serious and royal looking. And you'll notice there's one spot left for Draculaura, who's actually who I'm going to be redesigning in next month's video. So that was my redesign of Cleo de Nile. Be sure to let me know what you guys thought down in the comments below. I always love hearing what you guys have to say and talking about it with you in the comments. Be sure to follow me on Instagram, where I post art 3 times a month. Sorry that didn't happen in April. March was really busy and it led to me posting when I meant to post in April last month, and I didn't have enough time to catch up. So apologies on the different than usual schedule that's been going on recently. But as always, I have extra stuff planned for Mermay, so keep an eye out for that. And be sure to subscribe to me on YouTube, where I post videos once a month, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!